Awesome. I appreciate everybody hanging around until the very end of the conference. We almost didn't have a timer, so that was dangerous for you guys in like happy hour and dinner. All right, so the topic today is the core product offering, which is the kind of the primary strategy for us at Axum, and I think for the open source community as a whole. So at the State of Open edX yesterday, I mentioned that the product working group met for the first time last year in Lisbon at the conference to brainstorm about what we should focus on in the first year. And one of the three things that we decided to prioritize was that we would define what the platform is, which might sound a little bit strange at first, right? Like the platform's been around for what, like 10 plus years now, like shouldn't we know what it is? But I'd argue that it's actually been a little bit difficult to say like exactly what Open edX platform is and who it's for. And that's because the platform does a lot of things. It supports a lot of different use cases, which is great, that's awesome. But it can also lead to some confusion, which I'll dive into a little bit here. And so I decided that the metaphor that I wanted to use for this talk was a chameleon. Open edX platform is kind of like a chameleon. There's a lot of different things that it can do, right? A chameleon can have a lot of different colors, color combinations. The same for the platform. The platform can do a lot of different things. For example, the platform can support MOOCs, and the platform can support corporate training. Those are two fairly distinct, I would argue, use cases, especially when it comes to like the core features that you might need to support those learners in their journey. The platform can support blended learning, and there's also a lot of talk about microlearning. Those are two also, I think, fairly distinct things that might need some distinct feature sets to support them. The platform supports online degrees, and it supports national platforms. So we're talking about like higher ed and government, two completely different sectors. And this has all come from some data that we've done, or some research that we've done to gather data on the landscape of usage for Open edX. So this is from some of the data that we've been looking at over the last year or so. We did some analysis of a sample size of about 1,000 different instances globally, kind of like a randomized sample. And I was curious to see like what's the sector breakdown? Where is Open edX used by sector? And it's probably no surprise that about half-ish of the use cases come from higher ed. About a quarter of the use cases come from enterprise or business, corporate. 15-ish% come from the nonprofit sector, and another 10% or so come from the government sectors. So there's a pretty wide spread of different sector uses for the platform. But digging in even further into that data, I was curious to know like what within those sectors, how is the platform used? Are there different use cases in those areas? In higher ed, there's two primary like high-level uses for the platform, to support matriculated students and to support non-matriculated students. Obviously, non-matriculated is the more predominant use case, but there's a growing interest, I think, across the community. Like there were just 2 lightning talks on using Open edX as an LMS. So there's obviously a growing interest in supporting the matriculated students. And again, it like leads to these questions: what features should we be developing? Where should we be prioritizing our investments? In the enterprise space, there was a pretty clear breakdown between private and public. So on the private side, we kind of made like some assumptions, right? These are probably like internal training programs, companies using Open edX to do internal HR training, versus public programs. These were like companies that maybe do like workforce reskilling. So they're offering paid or subscription courses to learners. So again, like two pretty different use cases, right? Internal training versus selling courses to students. In the government space, about half of the usage comes from national platforms. So there's about, I think, 20-ish countries that are using Open edX to deliver their national education programming. There's a lot of different use cases in the other half of that, right? So there's industry-specific training. So there found instances of like city governments using Open edX to do trainings. This sector here, the international governmental organizations, that's where I was actually working beforehand, working for the United Nations. They use Open edX as a platform for a lot of their public education initiatives. But again, we're looking at like pretty different use cases here. And in the nonprofit space, there's just a whole array of different use cases. A lot of it is sort of public advocacy type programming. There's also some internal training going on, but it's across all these different sectors, right? Everything from like cultural and religious associations to like nonprofits focused on education, teacher training, International development is a huge area as well. But this is just kind of illustrate, right? Here's this wide array of uses that the platform is developed for. This theme that Open edX is a lot of different things is also apparent when you do an analysis of some of the topics that have been discussed at past conferences, which was kind of a fun exercise. So just a couple of examples. This was a talk from 2 or 3 years ago, kind of Open edX bread and butter, right? Strategic approaches to MOOC development. So that's one area of interest, kind of juxtaposed with full online degree programs, right? A totally, I would argue, like different use case. Obviously, you can jump, scale from one to another. But again, like we're looking at different feature sets, different uses. Another illustration of that, from MOOC to Souk. I love the phrases here. Right? You will not find this anywhere else other than academia, right? This is like a specifically higher ed kind of talk. Juxtaposed with corporate blended learning, right? Again, 2 very different use cases. And this one to me is the most interesting from like a product management strategy angle. The best of both worlds in an online master's, integrating Open edX and Canvas, juxtaposed with transforming Open edX into the next LMS for online or for on-campus learning. So if I'm looking at this from a product perspective, right, are we competing with Canvas or are we collaborating with Canvas, right? These are 2 very different strategic directions that we could go. So why is this a challenge? And it's a challenge, I think, for many of us in the community across different personas. First, from the perspective of product managers, this diagram is from a product management 101 course. The center of this diagram, right, this laser focus, the point of this unit in the course is that product managers, your #1 goal is to create a laser focus for a product. It doesn't matter what sector you're in, doesn't matter what the product is. Like your #1 goal is to make sure that everyone on the various different teams is aligned with what the product is, and everyone's aligned with the strategic roadmap. And some of the tools that you might use to build that are like, the competitive analyses, the product initiatives, and product goals. And it's relatively easy, it's comparatively easy, I guess, if you're a product manager at a company where there's a pretty straightforward set of goals, right? If you have a board or a CEO that says, your goal is to increase growth in like the healthcare sector, for example, by 15% over the next 6 months. All right, that's pretty clear. You got a laser focus around that. You align all of the research, you align the competitive analysis and the goals to sort of support that strategic focus. But with the Open edX platform, there's been a lot of different foci. And so it leads some of the product folks in the community to be asking, like, well, how do we know what to design if there's no singular focus for the product? How do we know what to put on the roadmap, or how do we know where to invest in one area versus another? And it's not just product managers with these pain points, for developers as well. So this is a snapshot of the list of things that the build, test, release working group, the BTR working group, has to test every single time we do a new release, which is twice a year at this point. This is just a small portion of this list. The list grows every year. And folks in the group are asking a very relevant question, right? What do we prioritize in terms of testing? Like, how do we know what to test? And this is a question that should be answered by product, right? It should be fairly straightforward. You align the product goals with also what is tested in the community. There's so much to test, and it's difficult to put parameters around what you focus on. And then for end users as well, it can become challenging when there is so much in the product and it's not well documented that end users are asking questions like, how do I use this? And this is just an example from Read the Docs, right? We've got like 6 levels of hierarchy here, like 6.1, 0.2, 0.1, 0.1, with not a whole ton of guidance around what the feature is or how to use it. And this is like no fault of anybody's. This is just the nature of a product that is built and built over time. But end users are asking this question, right? How do I use this? So does this mean that Open edX has an identity crisis? I'd actually argue no. And the reason I'm saying no is because of some of the research that's happened over the last couple months that's been driven by one of the subgroups of the working group, the product narrative group. And so this subgroup has been trying to tackle this question in a kind of as quantifiably as we can. across the community. What is Open edX? What is the Open edX platform? We need to define what the platform is before we decide what actually should be in it or what should be perhaps in the ecosystem around it. And so we put together a research project. We looked at how providers across the ecosystem define the platform, which is a really interesting exercise. All right, there's a marketplace of over 86 providers. We looked at how they position Open edX on their websites, how they market the platform. And then we distilled all of those findings into a set of 7 different value propositions that are all like equally true about the platform, right? Because it supports all these different use cases. All of these value props are true. But what we wanted to get a sense of is in the community, how are they ranked? Like, is there a sense of prioritization? What do folks in the community find most valuable, or what is most important to their clients when it comes to positioning the platform and its value proposition? And so these are the results, the top 3. Number 3 was scale at low cost, which is obviously no surprise to anybody. Open edX excels at scale. Number 2 was the ability to customize for all these different use cases. So the challenge is also the key value, which was an interesting takeaway. And then number 1 was freedom, again, tied to kind of customization, right? So it's open source, there's no licensing costs, and it's free to extend and modify, which enables that mass customization. And so my biggest takeaway from this survey is that the ability to support all of these different use cases is actually what's so special about this platform. Like, that's great. We're never actually going to define a single use case, and we shouldn't. But to me, then the question that follows that is, how do we simplify the platform, or how do we simplify the experience so that we can eliminate or even like mitigate some of the challenges that I just described above, while still enabling maximum capacity to customize and maximum ability to apply all of this flexibility that everybody finds so valuable about the platform. So how do we strip away all the colors from the chameleon to get at like the core raw chameleon, in other words, to go back to the metaphor? So this is the idea of where the core product offering comes in. We need to create a simple core out-of-the-box installation or out-of-the-box install experience. And we need to shift all of the use cases that are more specific to a catalog of tools that can be used to then customize based off of that core install. And so the idea is that the core is this like colorless, this black and white chameleon. And then you can color in the chameleon based on the tools that you need that are specific to your use case. So how can we make this easier? Open edX is already good at customizing, so how do we make this even easier for folks so that we can support all of these different use cases and even more that might pop up in the future? Okay, so then the question becomes, like, what parameters do we use to decide what actually goes into the core? And this is also coming from some of the survey work that the product working group did. We wanted to land on an actual definition of the Open edX platform. And so this is still a working definition. Again, in the questions or even in the town hall tomorrow, we can continue to have the conversation. Is this the right way to frame it? But based on all of the data, we landed on Open edX is an open source platform to build and deliver online learning experiences that are customizable, scalable, and designed for how people learn. And what I really want to highlight here is this middle part here, build and deliver online learning experiences, because I think that is the core product offering. So for example, an authoring environment is obviously core to building an online learning experience. The ability to create multiple choice problems is core to that. Things like a calculator tool, I would argue, are maybe not quite so core. And that's because any subject, regardless of what the subject is going to need the ability to assess. But a calculator tool is specific to a subject, right? And if you're building an instance that is teaching in the humanities or that is corporate training, you may not need that tool. If you're teaching physics courses, you absolutely need that tool. And so how do we build an ecosystem that enables you to easily have a core, but then pull in the right tools that you need to support the exact type of use case that you're trying to customize for? And so this concept of the core product, we've been trying to socialize it now for quite a bit. This is so in the open source community, there's a process called the OEP process. And this is sort of best practices and standards for the Open edX open source community. All major decisions or all major new concepts are kind of codified in these OEPs. So what we did was we used this OEP process to introduce some of the key concepts and terminology for the core product. This OEP was open for community feedback for a number of weeks. We integrated as much as we could on both the technical and product sides, and we've landed on a couple of core definitions. And I wanted to spend a couple minutes with this language just to make sure, again, we're all kind of on the same page. So the core product is defined as a clear articulation of which features, experiences, and use cases come fully supported in the default configuration of the community-maintained Open edX installation. So the core product should be the community's first priority when it comes to maintenance, security patches, and feature investment. So in other words, every time we do a new release, we should know exactly which features are coming out of it. The second key concept is the catalog. So the full catalog is defined as the core product plus all of the known extensions. And we're actually talking about building like an actual catalog, right? A database of tools, of components that will be created and maintained to be as comprehensive as possible. Community members will be encouraged to submit their extensions to be listed in this full catalog. And so what does this look like conceptually, right? This is conceptual. There's been no UX, no UI input into this. This is just kind of a product idea at this point. But I'm kind of building off of the pages and resources space in the platform now. And so we're kind of moving toward this like app tile kind of approach to organizing the platform. And so in theory, we could imagine a world where maybe these two tiles are core product. These two things are core to the install. They come with the out-of-the-box installation. Obviously, a progress bar to track learner progress is going to be core. The discussions forums are core. Then we might imagine there are maybe two other tools that are like optional X blocks. These wouldn't be supported in the core, but the extension points would be supported, and there'd be a way to search for these and add them easily to the platform. And then maybe there's two other tools that are like third-party LTI apps that could be integrated as well. And so you get this kind of almost like point-and-click app experience in terms of building your instance. And in terms of the catalog concept, again, a very conceptual, no UI input in here. But the idea would be, it's almost like an app store kind of experience. So you've got, for example, like these two are third-party LTI apps. These two are community-contributed X blocks. We could imagine this catalog environment where there's the possibility to search by subject. So for example, if you're teaching a physics course, you want to find all of the tools that support a physics course. You could do a search for physics, and you could find a mix of like all the LTI tools that have been potentially vetted by folks in the community or that are available, as well as all of the potentially like native X blocks, and you can kind of mix and match and just decide what you want to use in your core area, in your instance. Okay, so that's all kind of conceptual, right? The other main question to answer is like, how do we actually get to a core, right? How do we actually make these decisions? And we have been working on some template workflows and template processes that I wanted to kind of put forward here and socialize with everyone and kind of get your feedback on them. Like, does this sound like the right way to go? Are we thinking about this the right way? And so I think the way we get to a core is kind of like a feature-by-feature analysis of what currently exists in the platform. And we've identified 4 metrics that we think we should be analyzing against to make these decisions. So we have a lot of data gathering to do in the next couple of months. Those 4 metrics are, first of all, is this feature needed? So like stepping away from how it's implemented, getting to the heart of the question, do we even need this feature? And I think the way we define that is this mission critical to delivering a successful online learning experience? Like, do we absolutely need this from a pedagogical perspective? How do we get this? I think there's a couple of different data sources we need to look at. Doing a comparative, or like, I don't like to use the word competitive, like a comparative landscape analysis. Is this used in Moodle? Is this used in Coursera and Canvas? Is this widespread in other places? But also an independent pedagogical assessment. Is there like peer-reviewed research to support the need for this tool or not? And we're not saying that should be like a gating factor, but rather like, is there anything we're missing, right? Are there peer-reviewed studies that demonstrate we should be doing some capability and we don't have that feature? So that's the first question. The second question is it used? How widely used is this feature? And we want to be looking here both at edX data and the community data. I was really excited to hear the course graph talk earlier. I think that'll help provide potentially a lot of data to help support some of these decisions. But also looking more broadly as well, like across the community, how widely are these things used? The third question is this good? So getting away from, like, do we actually need this feature to the actual implementation? Like, is the way we've currently implemented this the right way to do it, or are there gaps? And to this end, we've put together some product quality, like standard QA product quality rating metrics that we can use. This is probably the most quantifiable of the questions. We can actually get to a rating of how well the feature works. And then finally, is there a better option? Is there an LTI tool that might do this thing better? Is there an XBlock that's in development that might do this thing better? You know, are there other things that we should be looking at as alternatives? So that's kind of the general framework, the metrics that we're looking at. What I wanted to do is spend a couple minutes going through an actual example, kind of like test drive an example of a feature, and let's put it through all these metrics and see kind of where we land in terms of a product recommendation. And the one that we've been working on is one that we know and love, the course wiki. There's probably like opinions in the audience already about whether or not we need it. But let's try and be quantifiable about it. Like, let's try and see where this actually lands in terms of, is this core or is this an extension point? All right, so the first question, is this needed? Is this like mission critical to delivering a successful online learning experience? So first, let's like competitive or comparative landscape research. Let's see what else exists. So Moodle actually does offer a wiki plugin. It's a plugin, so it doesn't come with their like out-of-the-box install, but it's an option. It exists in their ecosystem. Canvas is like, nah, we don't need that. So there's no wiki tool in Canvas. Interestingly, though, and this is probably what surprised me the most, there are tons of forums, forum posts in the Instructure community with faculty saying like, oh, we want a tool, we want a wiki tool. And there's this hack that people have discovered to use the page tool in wiki, or in Canvas to function as a wiki. And so it's interesting to me that there's like a demonstrated need, right, in terms of forum, like qualitative forum analyses, but Canvas has not responded to it. And I don't know if that's, you know, who knows why. Maybe they've just decided the page is enough and that's fine. And then from a pedagogical assessment perspective, there really wasn't any, like in a Google Scholar search, like not a ton of, like nothing really peer reviewed around like you absolutely need wiki to deliver a successful learning experience. There are mentions in places like the Vanderbilt University has a Center for Teaching, and they did a bit of have like an overview of some of the tools you might use in an online learning experience to see, you know, what you can do. For the most part, the use cases tend to be like small courses, right, 30 or under, where you've got an instructor-led, a very personalized kind of experience, which is, if you look at the like 90% non-matriculated, 10% matriculated is maybe not aligned with like the majority current use of Open edX, so another point of comparison. And so if we're thinking about this on like a high, medium, low kind of rating system, I would say that the wiki is kind of a medium in terms of, do we actually need this? I would argue it's probably not like totally mission critical, but it's not like we just want to throw it away. Okay. So is it needed? Is it used is the next question. So from a community perspective, there was this survey that was put out in the forums a while ago, asking like, if we got rid of the wiki, would you walk away from Open edX entirely? And so, I mean, I guess the first thing to note is like there wasn't even that much engagement, right? Like people saw this and were like, I don't even want to take time to vote for this. But I think it's pretty clear that usage is probably on the low end for this tool. In terms of product quality, so this is a snapshot of some of the ratings that Serena's been driving this project to put together, QC standards. And so what we've tried to do here is identify some of the key metrics that we'd want to analyze feature by feature in terms of quality. And so things like internationalization, which is important for the community, performance for different personas, usability, so UI, UX, UI, scalability. And you can kind of see here, it's actually not scoring horribly. There's some good, and this is done on like a, I think, good, moderate, poor rating system. The UI is probably a weaker link in the experience here. There's a couple of unknowns. And like I said, this is probably the most quantitative portion of this. And this scored kind of in the middle. I think it was like 58% or something, so in like the medium range. And then this question, is there a better alternative? And all of the forum activity in Canvas actually led to the quote-unquote discovery of this tool, this LTI app. So there's an open source wiki solution, which is when you do a little bit of analysis, it's more updated. There aren't the security concerns, which was another part of the quality analysis prior as well. So here, there is a better alternative. And so taking all of these things into account, is it needed? Maybe. Is it used? Not really. Is it good? Kind of. Is there a better option? Yes. And so this is, I'm being a little bit like cheeky about it, but like that's intentional, right? This is not gonna be like a 100% objective thing that we can do for every single feature, right? There's gonna be some things that we can assess more quantitatively. Some of it's gonna be a little bit more kind of interpret the data. But I'll kind of walk through like how I would interpret this from a product perspective, right? So to me, the most important one is this feature required from a pedagogical perspective? Are we missing something in terms of delivering a successful online learning experience? And the results here are like, maybe. Like it's not high. If it's high, it's obviously gonna go in the core. If it's medium, I'm not sure. Like I wanna do some more analysis. The usage is low, and so there's a concern, like as a community, do we wanna be supporting features that have low to no usage? There's obviously better ways to use that time in resourcing, so that's an obvious one. The product quality rating was, the areas where it ranked lower would require some significant investment, right? So there's some security issues that popped up in that analysis. There's some UI issues that popped up in that analysis. And so there's a lot of work that we would have to invest in order to bring this up to par. And the fact that there's a comparable tool that's open source and that works better effectively when you do the face-to-face comparison, I think it's pretty clear that the product recommendation would be, we're not gonna support this in the core, we're gonna remove it from the core, but we're gonna list this alternative LTI tool in this catalog and offer options. And to me, the idea in the catalog is that we would potentially even list both, right? There's a native tool, we list the weaknesses of it or the challenges of it. We also have alternatives, right? And so folks can make decisions. We don't want to be prescribing decisions anywhere. Like folks can make decisions about what they want to use. Okay, so what are the possible outcomes of all this? So in theory, we're going to do this for every feature, every X block. So two high-level options, right? It's either in the core or it's not in the core. If it is in the core, there's a couple of different pathways that we can get a little bit more nuanced in terms of making some decisions. If it's in the core and it meets the quality standards, then there's no investment required. That's like the ultimate, that's the dream. Like we want every feature to kind of fall into this category. If we do need the feature, but it falls short of quality standards, this is where we start to make decisions about investment. And this is where I think it starts to become very helpful from a product perspective. We can start making decisions about where we invest based on data and based on what we want to see the platform evolving into, which is really helpful. The third alternative is that we need the feature, but there's a better alternative, and so we need to do like some sort of, there's a requirement for alternative implementation. So those are kind of the three options there. If the feature is not in the core, I think there's two options from there. One is, it's not in the core, but there's a supported extension point, and it's in the catalog. And so we're not like trying to just boot stuff out of the core, right? Like the idea is that we want to keep as much as possible in this ecosystem, but by putting it in the catalog, we can support the extension point and enable people to search this catalog, find what they need, and customize based on their specific use cases, rather than having this complicated platform that has kind of everything in it at the core install. Or it's not in the core, and we decide that it's really not necessary for any pedagogical purposes. I'm not sure yet. I actually haven't come across any examples yet of anything here yet in this category. Who knows? But the idea would be we don't put it in the core. It's not in the catalog. We remove it from the core. There's no catalog option, but that still doesn't mean, like, you can still use it, right? Like, this is an open source platform. You can do what you wish. So by the end of this project, like the learning objective, like by the end of this course you will have, so by the end of this project, what we'd love to have is a clear list of what the supported features are in the community install. So it's like a, A, B, C, D. These are the things that come supported in the core. That's where we focus documentation efforts, that we make sure all of the documentation is up to date. That's where we focus on making sure all of those features are up to par in terms of quality. And if they're not, that's where we focus on investing. And this is going to help all of these personas, right? If you go back to that persona analysis, it's going to help product folks make better decisions about where to invest, because we're all going to be working off of the same framework. It's going to help developers because they're going to know what to test. They're going to know what's prioritized. And it's going to, at the end of the day, help users, right? We're going to have a clear set of expectations around what the platform is and how to use it. We'll have a clear sense of how to prioritize the documentation, which is going to end up benefiting everybody, but most importantly, users at the end of the day. And in terms of the entire ecosystem, it will enable this blank chameleon to be colored in any way you want, right? So depending on the type of use case that you're trying to support, you'll be able to kind of mix and match and color your own chameleon based on the specific needs that you have for your users. So that's the concept. I hope we have time for questions. So.
Who has a question? All right, as far away as possible. I love it.
Thank you so much, and sorry for my choice of seat. I don't know if this is a question so much as it's like a suggestion, or I guess the question is like, what do you think? So I love the rubric you were describing, Jenna, about how to evaluate what would make a good candidate for being part of the core product. And you know me, so you know I was especially interested in the pedagogical criteria. As a suggestion, I wonder whether, based on some of the other sort of like self-definition and some of the user analysis of that you were describing before, it feels like there's some concept of what a representative type of learning or type of learner might be, that we could peg a slightly more specific description of what constitutes pedagogical quality or pedagogical effectiveness. If we're like, sure, well, these are relatively self-motivated adult learners who might benefit from certain types of support more than others, for example, that could also help. I imagine you thought about that, and we're just sharing a single example, but because that one can be very, very, very squishy, obviously, that was I'd love to hear more about how you've thought about that, and, what do you think about specifying it in that direction that might help speed up evaluations potentially?
Mm-hmm. Yeah, that's a really fantastic suggestion, and I'm glad you brought it up because it's kind of like it's a totally different way of looking at, like, instead of like what are you trying to accomplish, it's like what kind of learners are you trying to reach, and those may be two completely different sets of like criteria, right, or results, and so yeah, absolutely, we should be looking at not only what the intended use case is, but also like what is the demographic of learners, or what are the profiles of learners, and how does that impact what they need or what kind of tools they may need in order to be successful. So yeah,
absolutely. Thanks for this approach, and I'm sorry I haven't read OUP 57 before now, but two things. One, it seems like the extension points become a really critical feature, and I went to Michael Reutman's presentation about LTI, and I was amazed by how much more complicated it was than I thought. So that obviously needs investment.
That needs huge investment.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And I don't know about the other extension points and whether they have to go through some kind of similar process to this. I mean, LTI is clearly useful, but I don't know how long that list is. I know it's longer. And my question was, Is the catalog a feature? Is that part of the core also? Because it seems like the way you presented it seemed like it has to be very easy to use in a way that it isn't now.
That's a good question. Is the catalog part of the core? I mean, we've thought about it from the perspective of like the UI, right? Like, what does the experience look like for everybody, for an author, for a developer, from a learner perspective? I don't know. I'm stumped by that. Like, it's a good thing to talk through. We would want to maintain it, right? So like maintainability is going to be key. We want it to be curated. We want it to meet all of the product, like basically all of the quality assessments. And so, yeah, maybe it is part of the core. It is something that it's obviously something we would support community-wide. Serena says yes. And to your other point too, I mean, I think another like major project that needs to happen fairly soon is like a major discovery around what are we need to come up with that full list of all these different extensions and what the workloads would be in order to get them up to speed.
Do we have any other questions? Any thoughts? Want to pick apart the product quality ranking?
Serena wants you to ask her quantitative questions.
I really want a quantitative question about that, actually.
One of the things that didn't make it into the top 4 criteria was the level of effort to modernize. You spoke to it, but I don't know if that has felt like a determinant, or if so far on your ratings you feel like the other 4 generally is giving you a good enough signal or guess on the right thing.
I wouldn't want effort to like interfere with the pedagogical assessment, at least, right? Like the question of whether we need it or not, it shouldn't be an effort question. It should be like, is this required, right? And we will do whatever it takes to make this happen. Yeah, I mean, we could probably like, when it comes to like to me, that's like a step 2 question, right? So we decide that there's a subset of features that require investment. They don't meet the standards, but we know we need them. Maybe effort would then play in terms of how we prioritize from there. Like, where do we start? Where do we invest first, right? Where's maybe some low-hanging fruit with high ROI? So yeah, that's a good call out.
Can I say something?
Yeah.
I think it does play somewhat of an effort as a tiebreaker. Like when we're looking at the wiki and we're looking at that medium level on the product quality, it got super low marks on maintainability and actually is it maintained. And so the amount of effort it would take to bring that up to par, so when we're looking at something, we're like, is this a yes, is this a no? And we're like, then effort, like you said, probably plays a role. But the wiki is a great example of like one where it's like, yeah, our analysis showed that like, oh my God, it would be a lot of effort to make this good. Oh.
All right, so when we're looking at things like the modular learning initiative and all the new features that people want, and are you sort of already kind of dividing it in your head between like, you know, these could be extensions and these are like applicable things, these are the core things, and I guess how does that play when you're looking at new, like even though those extension points might not exist yet, when you're evaluating new product initiatives?
Yeah, I think I'd love to see us using this framework also going forward, right? So not just retroactively, but maybe this is the framework that we just rally around in terms of new features are contributed. It could become a metric in terms of like even product review, right? In terms of assessing whether or not something gets approved, whether it's how it's implemented platform-wide. So absolutely, I would like this to be like both a backward-facing and a forward-facing framework that we can use to assess, current features and as well as like new and upcoming features.
So let me begin with, I'm probably the least educated person to ask this question. I do accounting, so I don't code, and this may be very much related to the first question that was asked. So we started with 8 disparate use cases. Now we have a core and a big list of add-ons kind of in a catalog, right? So do we think about, for those that are implementing often, right, in a particular field, by the way, the use case 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8 are most often this bundle, right? So,
Yep.
hey, this is your MOOC bundle, and this is your
Yep.
learning bundle. And again, it may be very much like that first question, but something I thought I'd ask.
Yeah, there's, if you dive more into OF57, there's like more, I wanted to do more here in the talk, but like, there's only so much time. There's the concept of, I think we called it extended bundles, the idea that we would kind of like prepackage features that support some of the common use cases. So for example, if you're, there's a set of features that support the like residential or matriculated learning, matriculated student use case, that we could create like little bundles that you could do like a little custom install plus this bundle to support this common use case. Yeah.
No, you're good. This is not what I signed up for because I didn't sign up for this.
Good exercise.
No, it's good exercise. Just, I didn't actually sign up for this job today, but I'm doing it. And I love it. I love the exercise.
So I just wanted to so there's some features of OpenEdX that are kind of sub-features, and by that I mean MatchX, for example. It's something that's integrated across the discussion board,
Yeah.
in your problem editor, into your text editor, so on and so forth. Where would features like that go? Would it be something that we would consider core because it's part of something that was already part of the core? Or would it be something that might be, say, part of a MOOC bundle instead, or removed? Because it's definitely something that not everybody uses all the time. However, when you need it, it's required. There's no getting around it.
Interesting. Did you have like a specific example of that type of?
Yeah, any STEM course that has lots of equations. We're at MIT. So, yeah, so if you're doing a course on quantum computing, for example, you need to be able to talk in equations in your discussion board, and you need to put descriptions on how you interpret the interface and what sort of math you're doing.
Yeah. I wonder if the bundle concept could work there as well. If there's a set of features that are like critical to a certain use case, right? Then we should be asking the question like, what are the other like related features that are attached to this that are necessary for it to run, and we make sure that they're all like bundled together.
Yeah, so I like, because there will be feature dependencies essentially
Yep.
that will roll out. So if you roll the discussion board out, are we doing email notifications for people posting on the discussion board? Is that considered part of the core, or is that something that you would put in the catalog? How has there been any thought put into those kinds of considerations?
Yeah, we didn't include it in here, but we've done like mapping exercises as well. So I think the feature mapping exercises like to look at dependencies as well as configuration mapping as well, like as there are the configuration considerations to take into account. And I think that's, again, it's kind of like part of the phase 2. Like once we get a sense of which features are required, then we do these more intensive mapping exercises to make sure we've got everything that's dependent on it, as well as like looking at the configuration landscape then to make that assessment.
I have a little bit of a follow-on question for Jenna, because I think maybe something I'm hearing in there is like, what if you have a requirement like discussion boards need to support math equations for quantum computing? Discussions are core, but what about that, like do we build in math expressions to discussion forums because some classes require it, even though it's not necessarily the basic use case?
Could that become like an implementation question? Like could that be, because it's not really, potentially not part of the core from a product perspective, but necessary for a certain subset of use cases, if that could be shifted to like implemented as a plugin versus as a core feature, maybe that would be the way to approach it.
I would say it could be an implementation thing, and then what level of required technical expertise would you be required to get that implementation out the door?
Yeah.
Right? So is it, okay, you need a sysadmin or somebody in DevOps to go and make changes to like a feature flag?
Yep.
Or is it something that, a user or somebody can go and just change in the advanced settings and just say true? At what level do you require the interface for these kinds of dependencies?
Yep.
That's an awesome question. I really like that one. We are at the end of time for the Thursday sessions. Thank you guys so much for coming. Thank you, Jenna, for a wonderful talk. And see you guys tomorrow.